The country is on high alert anticipating the results of the election. One of the main issues creating anxiety for many Americans is the City College community, for many Americans and the City College community is immigration. Here to talk to us about the topic of immigration is Justin Akers Chacon, a Chicano Studies professor here at City College. Justin is the author of several books on the topic, including The Border Crossed Us and No One is Illegal. Thanks for joining us, Justin.
Hi, Marco. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us what the sentiment has been among your students this election around the issue of immigration?
Yeah, well, I would say that the general sentiment has been concern and fear, primarily because of the fact that the politics of immigration have moved so far to the political right, and that there hasn't really been a clear sense of any kind of progressive or forward-thinking politics on this issue, as Trump and the Republicans have largely determined and controlled the narrative, and have played a significant role in shaping the political landscape around this, to such a point that Kamala Harris's campaign more or less has adopted much of the Trump Republican framework. And so going into the election over the last few weeks, there was general concern that there was going to be no positive outcome regardless of who won.
Thank you. And what's been your experience, or what are some of the conversations you've had with your students around their concerns around immigration and these policies that you're talking about?
Well, as an instructor of Chicano history, immigration, is a very significant aspect of that history. And so as a scholar of this field, especially looking at immigration policy, we've talked, in general each semester, but especially this semester, we talk extensively around the history of immigration policy and how immigration policy has been shaped and implemented through the decades. And for the most part, relevant to what's happening tonight in this election, we have talked about how, going back to the earlier part of the 21st century, we had a significant social movement for immigrant rights and immigrant legalization back in 2006. And at that time, there was significant participation of our students marching, protesting, and taking different types of political action for immigrant rights. And this was a very important learning experience, because in Chicano history, there has always been defense campaigns and movements to support migrants and refugees, through the course of history, and that course of history has a lot of history, unfortunately, a lot of examples of how politicians have scapegoated migrants and orchestrated mass deportations. And so, going back to the discussions of how immigration politics now have been impacted by, or at least were earlier in this, earlier in the 2000s, were impacted by a mass movement for immigrant rights, and that culminated in the election of Barack Obama in 2008, who promised to essentially implement a legalization campaign within his first 100 days. And at that time, he had a significant majority in both houses of Congress, but this, in the end, decided not to move that forward. And so that created the conditions of demoralization amongst people who had hoped there would be immigration reform. And it also put wind in the sails of Trump, who successfully ran in 2016 now on the failure of that immigration legalization, and instead ran scapegoating and criminalizing, especially Mexican migrants, in building his campaign in 2016 around building the wall. So, so I think that, this piece of history is really important for understanding where we're at today, because for the most part, there has been significant support for immigration legalization. That's been consistent for the last few decades, but once it becomes politicized and into especially a presidential campaign, we see that the Democrats specifically have failed to actually support an actual a legalization program. And so in 2020, when Biden was elected after 4 years of Trump, that was him and his vice president Kamala Harris ran on a campaign of offering immigration legalization as one of their first political objectives within the first 100 days, offering a moratorium on deportations to examine how to examine the system of deportation in response to the fact that so many people were being deported. So this more recent history helps us understand, and this is what I convey to my students in our discussions, is that by the time we get to the 2024 election, we see that things have moved so far to the right that Trump more or less built his campaign around immigration on a mountain of lies, racist and really vile lies pertaining to immigrant criminality and things like that. But Kamala Harris also ran on a very far right-wing platform. And in fact, she actually ran on an immigration proposal that was crafted by the Republicans in 2023 that set the stage for her promoting the idea that she would shut the border down. That would be her plan, would be to shut the border down to essentially codify and maintain what Trump had started, which was ending the refugee asylum-seeking process, and emphasizing that she would expand border enforcement, increase immigration enforcement agents, all of these things. And so that was what she ran on. So there was very little actual difference in substance. I mean, there was difference in rhetoric, but not difference in substance. And so I think in our discussions around this issue, students, I think there was a lot of confusion because the rhetoric, because of the difference in rhetoric. But once we actually looked at the policies and examined what both sides were campaigning on, it became clearer that unfortunately, this was an issue that was dominated by Trump and the Republicans, and that was a way in which they determined the narrative. And Kamala Harris was not able to distinguish herself or her campaign as being one that stood, countered that. And so I think that probably contributed to some of the confusion in terms of how students were trying to understand this. I think it definitely contributed to people, not being inspired to go to vote for Kamala with the belief that there would be some kind of immigration reform, because that was not even promised like it was in the last several election cycles by the presidential candidates.
Awesome. Well, Justin, thanks so much for that incredible insight into the topic. I know it's super important for everyone to understand the full context of this issue because everyone's very anxious about it. Thanks so much for joining us again, Justin. And for our viewers, thanks for joining us as we talk about this important issue. We're going to have a lot more coverage on a lot of other issues that matter to city college communities. And we'll have live updates for you at sdcitycom.com. And be sure to follow us at SD City Times on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. This has been Inside City Election Edition. I'm Marco Guajardo. Thanks for joining.